Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Enterprise Universe Q&A with Dr. James Stalker. Just for anybody who's new to the channel, this is a channel dedicated to discussing the enterprise universe, which is a new and exciting business and technology and, frankly, society impacting concept from Dr. Stalker. Just as a quick introduction to Dr. Stalker himself: scientist, inventor, engineer, philosopher, and entrepreneur. So, James, I thought a good place for us to start, pick up the conversation, would be to maybe just give a quick recap of what the enterprise universe is from our previous conversation, so that anybody new or rejoining the conversation would have an idea of what it is we're talking about in these Q&As.
Well, Eamon, thank you. So we really touched on a lot of topics yesterday, but like you said, I think we need to sharpen the focus on the enterprise universe. So the idea really about this universe I really talked about is that it's the superset of businesses globally. So because of that, it does have to have a special purpose in terms of carrying out that vision. So the purpose for that is what I call spreading goodness through innovation. And we discussed all three words, but the through is the fourth word also is important, because through innovation, products and services come out, and those are spread to the world. So we're not really talking about every goodness action out there. We're only talking about innovation related products and services and how they come about and how we spread them for goodness in the world. So we touched on that. And I also talked about briefly my philosophy, which is what it is one has to be able to extract the most out of their talents and hard work in support or in benefit of others globally. So that's my personal philosophy. Obviously, if somebody were to say, okay, I want to extract the most benefit out of my talents and hard work for myself, that's a philosophy too. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not really selfish. You're trying to fulfill your own dreams. But I go a step beyond that, not only for myself, for others. That's really how my philosophy differs with some of the other people. So we talked about that. And, you touched on a little bit about the spiritual universe. And I wanted to kind of separate that from the physical universe and the enterprise universe. So, so spiritual universe really creates a separate dimension that we really have to be respectful, because we're not really talking about that within the enterprise universe, because the focus really is on entrepreneurs, corporations, and what their responsibilities are and how they could still make profit. Of course, we're not talking about, skimping on profits. You could still make a lot of money like you want to do, but at the same time, you could really, develop products and services for the goodness aspects and also spreading all over the world. So we talked about that. And there was one interesting point that you made about spreading.
Sorry.
In terms of, the concept of giving away, right? So we kind of really dwelled on that enough, but I want to just say that giving away is really about what businesses are all about, right? You are in the business of giving away of your products and services. So that's the reason why you actually start a business. So from that perspective, giving away is really the right attitude. And we didn't touch on that enough, but I wanted to talk about that. And then, of course, the backward compatibility. I talk about when you disrupt something, you really want to make sure you're not disrupting in such a way that you're throwing the whole thing away. So I want to kind of give you another example to encapsulate what I mean by that. So for example, I come up with a cutting edge renewable energy technology. and I go to a town in West Virginia, a coal miners town, and I go to them and say, hey guys, all of you miners, you are going to lose your job because I'm going to have this renewable energy technology. Too bad that you don't have a job. So what I mean by backward compatibility is if I go to the same town and still want to develop my power plant, renewable energy plant, but I would say, hey, miners, listen, I want to train you guys on this new technology.
Mhm.
So you're transitioning from your mining jobs to the new jobs. So that's a lot more palatable and received well by these towns. So that's what I mean by coming up with disruptive technologies, but also understand how the backward compatibility works.
Well, I
So
think
that,
there's a couple. Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there that strike me coming out of that, Dr. Stalker. So one of those is that uh, there's an aspect to a certain extent of purpose and authenticity. In other words, the corporation needs an authentic self, if you will. Like, so in other words, you're connecting to your purpose, and that gives, it provides a certain authenticity to the whole situation. I think, as I can understand what you kind of said was that doesn't have to be a spiritual concept. It can be a very concrete business concept, but it still brings a certain authenticity to the situation because you're acting and doing in a predictable way based on coming from the purpose rather than it just being words. So I don't know if that resonates. And then number two is disruption has a social consequence. I think is to some extent what you're saying, and that if you are again authentic and if you are focused on goodness, you have to be aware that the disruption has to have some offsetting of the current. And I think that's where I think a lot of people reject uh, the rush to technology, where the technology is just disruption without the goodness, because all you get is the disruption, at least for the victims, if you will. So are those 2 points kind of in line with what you just said around the importance of purpose and the importance of disruption having to be mitigated? Is that true? Am I following correctly what you said there?
you're right on there, Eamon. So in the disruption part, really you're disrupting to make your customers' lives better, or
Right.
your stakeholders better, or your competitors better. In other words, I want to make my competitors better too. So when you are really thinking from that perspective, you have to have transition plans. You have to say, well, we're going away from coal in this next 5 years, 10 years, whatever the plan is. And here is how we're going to do it. You're not going to alienate some people because you got this disruptive technology. Because we're not talking about technology per se as the end goal. The end goal is to serve the customer,
Right.
and that coal miner happens to be your customer, or your partner, or whatever they come out to be. So you really have to pay attention to those things. And it makes business sense simply because you go to the mining town and you're trying to build this project. If you take on a different attitude, that project is never going to take off the ground.
Yes. Right.
So
And I think it
in other
also,
words, you're really shooting yourself in the foot by doing what they do, and that's really not, a good business sense for anyone to really take on.
and I think from what you said, the connecting idea again is back to purpose, like purpose in action, if you will, versus purpose as words. Yeah, that's at least that's what I'm taking out of this example is that the purpose is acted upon as a part of a thoughtful way of providing the service to the customer versus a somewhat more disruptive a way of just inserting the technology into society and not really considering the implications.
One of the things that you said yesterday, Eamon, that I was thinking about, if somebody is able to write down their purpose and they still treat that as a bunch of words,
Mm-hmm.
that's really not going to help too. Like you said, you put it on your door or on your building, you don't really mean anything by it. That's really not what I'm talking about. It's not doing something mechanically, but actually feeling about it and really mean what you say or what you say to yourself. So that's really why it takes a lot of time to develop it. In my case, it took me many, many years, Eamon. So I believe, so one of the things, I guess, when it came to me and I developed this 9 entrepreneurship fundamentals seminar and workshops, I could have kept it to myself and use it as a competitive advantage. But that's really not what my purpose is. My purpose is not to keep something to myself because I'm in the business of giving my talents and hard work in the service of others. So as soon as I solidified those ideas, I said I have to share with other business people in the world. So that's really the reason why I'm saying purpose becomes such centerpiece. But no, don't write words down when you don't mean it.
Right.
It doesn't really
Well,
make a
funnily
whole.
enough, I was thinking myself after our conversation, why haven't I written my purpose down? Funnily enough, and a thought crossed my mind, and whether it's true or not, that it's a responsibility. Once you actually write a purpose down, it's a kind of there's some aspect of an obligation now to live up to that purpose, and I wonder, and I don't know if this is true, man, but like I wonder if I'm not alone in kind of like there's a burden to purpose. Purpose, it to some extent is something you're taking on. And for some of us, maybe we're a little bit gun shy of that. Does that make sense? Uh,
It does. Everything we do, Eamon, if you really want to produce a product in the end that you're proud of, you have to work hard. I mean,
right.
your talents carry you only so far. So you have to work hard. And if you are not able to shoulder the responsibility or the burden of this purpose, then don't do it. Find something else to do, right? So
Right.
you're not justifying your own hard work, and obviously you're not helping your customers too at the same time. So I would say it's really one of those important things to do in your business career if you really are serious about it.
All right, and that's where I think the authenticity and it's like there's a lot to it. There's a lot to this idea of writing down your purpose and then acting on that purpose. That you're no longer being driven necessarily by the whims of society or what the neighbors say. You've actually chosen a purpose, and I think that's actually a pretty big deal. And when I thought about it afterwards, it was like, well, actually, maybe it's actually it's a big deal, and it's got philosophical and implications, and it's really quite profound, committing to the idea of a purpose. So
It, it, it's absolutely true. I think one of the main points that came from our chat the other day was that how
yeah.
powerful it is. In fact, purpose is, even though it's the cornerstone, there are 8 other fundamentals.
Hmm.
Once an entrepreneur goes through and makes them gel together for their own business, that's going to become a really powerful tool. And we will be touching on the rest of them throughout our Q&A sessions over the next months. But I think introducing one at a time
Yeah.
as we go along is really the way to go. And the purpose really is the one that they benefit from right off the bat for the long haul.
So maybe if I could, I like this is kind of bouncing around a little bit, but talking about innovation, like you've been innovating now for quite a long time, and we had this conversation of solving what's the relation between like innovation and a problem? So when you began your career, was there a particular problem you identified that you wanted to solve, or were you innovating for the thrill of innovation? Like where does innovation come from, at least in your personal, or the desire to innovate, I should say, come from in your personal experience?
Well, I guess that's really one of the big things that we would be talking about in the coming sessions, Eamon. But let me touch on just the core of it. So ever since I could remember, like when I was like in college, 18 years or so, I was highly mathematical in nature, trying to understand very complex problems. By the time I was like 18, the way I describe my experience or expertise I gained by then was, if you put all the math knowledge in the world into a sock, and I was really pulling on top of that sock when I was 18, saying, "This is all you've got." Really, and then I was disappointed, really, like, this is it, what am I going to do? But then something went off in my head, and it's like, no, that's why you are here, to do the rest of it. So the point I'm trying to make is, no matter what the subject matter is, the entire knowledge in that field is about 10%. The rest of it is unknown. So there's a whole lot of stuff for young people, old people to get involved and really understand that the entire gap there. So I did not really put it in those words at that time, but I understood there was a lot more that I could do than be disappointed at what was already there. So that really drives me to new heights in any subject matter that I put my mind to. And the innovation part, of course, as I described yesterday, doing something differently for the better in terms of a better design or theory or strategy from many different subject matters. In a medicine, you could say economy or economics, or social sciences and physics and chemistry, and any of those, they all have the same limitation that I talked about. The current knowledge base in any field is about 10%. So the rest of the field of that study remains to be unearthed.
Right.
And that's really what the realization was. And in fact, it really brings back to my Stalker method, which we will be talking about, in the coming sessions. But so that's really where my
The excitement
point,
comes from.
origin of my innovations really come from.
And I think there's a tendency, the human brain tends to attach to what it can see and ignore what it can't see. So I think we have a predisposition to constantly be looking at what we know versus exploring what we don't. I don't know about you, but it's like sometimes it feels like we pool our ignorance instead of necessarily, um, looking to the new, brighter. Like, it's a tough path being an innovator, because you're trying to bring something new into the conversation. And I think there's some neurological evidence to show that, like, just the brain is very pattern orientated, kind of, it's not easy for us to cognitively be in that, bringing new stuff in all the time. We kind of get used to the as is, if you will.
You really hitting a big area of my interest, Eamon. So I'll tell you this: if you are really interested in developing something above and beyond what's there, the first thing that you have to do as an individual is to conquer your own mind. Meaning, you cannot let it dictate what you cannot do. And one of the things that I was able to achieve early on in my life was that I wasn't letting my mind tell me what to do, or my body to tell me what to do. But you might ask, who are you then? So without the mind or the body. But I think it's the combination of those things. I'm working on a model about how to define that too. But you really have to say, you're predisposed to certain ways of doing things or certain ways of saying things, then you are not able to actually fulfill any of the innovations that we're talking about. You have to kind of get out of yourself. And I think the point of the matter, that the way I commented yesterday was about humans. I was talking about humans being in the enterprise universe, and I was referring to them as a separate species without my being combined into that.
Right.
The reason I was doing that was to look at that problem objectively without myself putting into the bubble. If I did that, my connotation of it or my meaning of it would become subjective. So that's the reason why I was saying.
I can't say I would say I suffer from that a lot, which is I can't get myself out of. It's like like I get feelings about things and I get thoughts about things, and it kind of one of the things, it kind of makes it hard to be objective because it starts turning into a bit of a stew, or a bit of a minestrone soup. Things get kind of bundled up, and I think that gets in the way of clear thinking. Let's just put it that way.
It does. Yeah, it's absolutely true.
And one of the things that I'm kind of interested in is philosophy. And when I talk to you, you remind me of the some of the existential type philosophers who aren't really spiritual, but they're still very much grounded in what is the reality of life. What is the reality of like, they're not going towards spiritual definitions, but you're very much, it feels to me like you're very much grappling with the who am I, how am I going to operate in the world, how do I operate with others, what is my purpose. These are very philosophically grounded concepts without falling back into like a religion or some other construct. It's very much, this is my situation and I'm making choices about how to operate within it. And I think that's very interesting. It's something interesting that I'm learning from the conversation, is that you're making it you're explicit about those things. Like, most of us aren't explicit about the operating assumptions upon which we're living our lives. We're just living our lives. We don't have an explicit, we haven't really thought about the underlying assumptions of our existence, if you will.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you from my years of thinking about this, religions and sciences, even though sciences are supposedly analytical and all of that, at some point they break down at the far edges of that thinking. So logic actually breaks down. I pursued logic and where it came from and all of that. So I'm not saying the sciences and religion would really kind of collide somewhere and they're the same, no. But they still have flaws at some point. So from that perspective, the way I think about this is, so there is an objective reality out there, outside of you as a human being, and you have a way of imagining or thinking about that objective reality. So think of that as a delta between your thinking and the actual objective reality. So that delta could be really large for some people, and it could be really, really narrow for some people because they started thinking about it and trying to understand that. But at some point, it becomes the fact that you really are pushing the objective reality itself, if you are elevating your thinking at that level. So that's really what it takes sometimes to be able to come up with some of these new theories. So it's but there's a huge leg room from where you have your own thinking and the objective reality, and that delta could be pretty large for some people. But they should not give up their hope, of course, that they still have to start understanding more and more and get closer and closer to this whatever objective reality that you think is there.
And I think part of what you're saying to me, at least this is my interpretation, what you're saying is to some extent the whole purpose conversation is about me and you and your relationship to what you're experiencing, in a way. It gives a point of reference, versus it's kind of chaotic and you're kind of, now there's more to it than that, I understand that, but you really, you have to have a kind of a stable, like, I guess good innovation, it feels like to have that clear thinking and that good innovation and that way of kind of seeing things a little bit clearer and identifying where the 90% is and the 10% thing. It's not just an easy thing, you know what I'm saying? It's not like just imagination. you know, because I think a lot of people think it's imagination. Oh, I had a good idea, you know, that oh, I had an idea. Versus, I think when you say innovation, it's more than just a good idea. It's grounded in a sense of who you are and what your purpose is and what your relationship to the outside world is, and then in some kind of knowledge of where the gap is, and then working through that gap. Or narrowing it. Is that what you were saying? Did I
That's
pick it up
that's
correctly?
exactly what I'm saying. And underneath all of that, Eamon,
Mhm.
your talents are fine. I think that help you, but hard work.
Right.
So the hard work really, and then you say, well, why do some people work harder than the others? It's really the desire to extract the most benefit out of your talents and your hard work in the service of others. But the service of others is a part that a lot of people miss, and it's really
That's
nothing wrong about it.
that's very interesting because we've had authenticity, we have purpose, and now we have service as another kind of concept that you've just brought into the conversation. So I think that's like I'm just like because I'm just seeing these words are unpacking, and there are certain very big ideas underneath that. So can you talk to us a bit about like what is service and why it's important?
Okay, so if when you develop the desire to do something,
Hmm.
okay, it is to satisfy yourself.
Hmm.
Perhaps you want to make money, so you have a car, whatever, right? So that's a desire that you're trying to fulfill with through your work. But afterwards, you would say, well, I got enough of what I want to do. What else do I want to do? Or you could say, I got more talents than I could ever use for myself. So what are you going to do then? So you really want to think about giving that to others. And particularly when you want to become a businessman, that's really what business is about. Business is about giving away your
Serving.
products and services. You're getting something back in return, like somebody's paying you for it and all that. But before you think about getting paid, you are in the business of giving something away that you have, that you possess, you worked for. That's what business is about. Not about selfishness where I want to make money by giving this away, but no, it's really giving that away. That's really what I mean by service. And the goodness part, Eamon, really helps you when you're exploring this 90% unknown land for your innovations. Nearly half of that, even 3/4 of that, would be useless innovations, or sometimes even dangerous, futile innovations. So you have to be grounded in the goodness part to say which of those innovations would actually help my customers
Which
and the
actually I find
customers of
a
humanity.
little, I don't know if you've had this observation, but given that we're in this pandemic situation, it's like how much of what we're doing is actually useful, you know? And I think this is how much economic activity is actually useful. Yes, yes, you can do it and you can get paid for it, and there might be a market for it, but that doesn't mean we should be doing it, you know, because it's not necessarily a I just like it just seems to me that we may be misdirecting so much of our energy towards services that aren't good for our customers, frankly. It's like it's,
Absolutely. I think the climate scenario is a great point to think about. So, people are saying we are affecting the climate through our,
yeah,
engagements in energy production and, driving cars around and all of that. That is absolutely true. But if you have scientific innovations, you don't have to skimp on your economic progress and go back in civilization, still be able to do certain things, but you have to also understand how what you're doing affects the environment. You have to have the right scientific understanding to be able to maintain or keep increasing your economic activity, but at the same time, not mess with the environment. And
right,
the only way you could achieve both is when you have that highly technical skill of understanding the
right.
system
Which
really clearly. So that's
which
really
means
why innovations are so important.
which means that which gets back to we're perhaps moving out of the age of thoughtless innovation to mindful innovation. It's like there's innovation and then there's thoughtful innovation. Because like I just feel that, you know, and I'm just observing based on, you know, it just feels to me like there's a when we can get away without half the economy and nobody notices, one wonders if everything we're doing is worthwhile.
And one other word I would use for innovations to aim, and that's probably more relevant.
Yeah.
Selfish innovations.
Yes.
Innovation for your own sake.
Yeah.
If that's the case, you really don't want to be a business person, because it's not about being selfish when you are in business. It's about really giving. That's
You're
really
a menace to some extent. So we're up on our time, Dr. Stalker. I thought this was a great conversation. Really enjoyed it again. Any last thoughts for the audience?
Well, you know, we went on several points yesterday and today, and you brought up the idea of a Tao and morality. I think I'd like to devote at least a session on that. I have some good ideas about it. And I alluded to the fact of, you know, people being confused, corporations being confused. I think confusion could be another, you know, session title for us to discuss, because that's really an important aspect of these sessions for the enterprise universe. And I want to talk about stakeholders' responsibilities and how they deal with entrepreneurs. I think that's another point that we can really kind of go into.
Right.
And you talked about entrepreneurial freedoms, how they could really kind of get away from all of the burden, and how the enterprise universe is going to ensure that. I want to talk about that fact as well. And you talked about degree of courage for entrepreneurs, and I thought that was a great phrase that you used. And I want to really elaborate on that too when we talk the next few sessions.
Great, great. And that all sounds fabulous. And really looking forward to chatting with you again soon. And thanks for everyone for tuning in.
Thank you, Eamon. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Sue.